Well, Republicans are promising to make some big changes when they take over control of the House. Well, among the things that they promise to focus on, the biggest overhaul of financial regulation since the 1930s, the Dodd-Frank Act. Here to talk about what may happen under this new Congress is Jeb Mason. He's a former policy advisor to Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson. Jeb, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, good to be here.
There's like 240 regulations still in here to be tinkered, figure out how to actually apply these new laws. What's actually going to change?
Well, it's a whole new world. I mean, first of all, the namesakes of the act are out of power now. Barney Frank doesn't have the gavel in the House Financial Services Committee anymore. Chris Dodd is retiring. I think Republicans are going to use their new power in the House and their new numbers in the Senate to really bring a focus to credit availability, to jobs, and to the competitiveness of U.S.-based firms. And they have, considerable power, especially in the House, in oversight of the implementation of those 240 some odd regulations. And I think they intend to use it.
So the VOLCKER rule has gotten a lot of media attention. Obviously, we've already seen firms have to change the way they do business, Goldman Sachs and the like, getting rid of some of their prop traders. What is actually going to be tweaked with the VOLCKER rule?
Well, you've seen Spencer Bachus, who's presumed to be the new chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, already fire off a letter calling attention to the fact that the VOLCKER rule, to some extent, was sold on the idea that other countries might follow suit. And so it goes back to this whole notion of the competitiveness of U.S.-based firms and employment in this country. He really wants to highlight, I think, the challenge for U.S.-based firms if these foreign countries don't follow suit, applying the same regulations to their own domestic institutions.
Now, jobs are a hot issue, but I would imagine you'd be hard-pressed to find a congressman who wants to come forward and defend jobs on Wall Street. That seems hard to sell.
Yeah, unless you live in New York. You're right. I mean, I don't think Republicans are anxious to run to the aid of banks necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of antipathy for the large Wall Street firms, Fannie and Freddie, the mortgage giants, among Republicans as well as Democrats. So I don't think that's a partisan issue. I think Republicans, though, do feel as though there are risks in the implementation of Dodd-Frank that if too strictly interpreted in the case of VOLCKER rule, for instance, that you could see a huge constricting of credit in the United States. And that's going to make it harder for Main Street businesses to grow and to hire and to plan for the future. So
perhaps something that some of the Fed governors are gesturing towards when they say, yeah, we can make the money easier, but you got to get the banks in there to work on that.
That's
but talk to me about consumer protection, because we do have Elizabeth Warren there in this advisory capacity. Who's going to head this agency?
I don't think we know yet. I think the Republicans, there's still a big fight yet to be had over the director, and the increased numbers of Republicans in the Senate aren't going to make it easier to confirm Elizabeth Warren as director. So the administration's got to be really smart about who they choose, and I think the Republicans think it's important to get someone in there that sets the right kind of tone and in the right kind of culture in what is a fledgling agency.
Where do you pull someone in?
Well, it's a tough question. I think they'd like to have someone who's had experience in financial institutions, that understands the inherent tension between consumer protection and having credit available. It goes back to something I've said before with you, we talked about in the past, was really that, if there's a focus at the Consumer Protection Bureau on just disclosure and making sure that consumers know what it is they're getting in a product, that's a good thing, and I think they'll find a lot of agreement on that. If they focus on really restricting different products and really being paternalistic in what should be made available to consumers, then I think you got a bigger problem.
Fannie and Freddie get I guess recreated in some other form, adjusted in some way before 2012?
That's a tough one. Republicans, I think, you're going to see a lot of legislation. You may not see new law. Republicans are going to have already introduced several bills that would wind down Fannie and Freddie's portfolios over time, and that would seek to move towards a private market. And I think they intend, at least initially, to be very ideologically pure on that point, that the government shouldn't be extending its guarantee in the mortgage market anymore. That's what's got us into trouble in the past. Now, they are going to run into a brick wall in the housing lobby, and there's a broad set of constituents, market participants in the housing space that are gonna push back on that. I mean, we didn't get Fannie and Freddie, subsidies for housing for nothing. It's because people have come to expect 30-year mortgages and cheap credit.
All right. Well, we'll stay tuned to see just what happens. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.